There are people who walk through life as if they're standing in a different room than everyone else, not physically, not visibly, but somewhere deeper, somewhere quiet. They smile at the right moments. They nod when expected. But inside, there's a distance, a kind of silence that doesn't break even in the loudest crowds, and if you've ever felt this way, you already know what I'm about to say. You already know the weight of it. Because the truth is simple and it's painful. The more awake you become, the fewer people can walk beside you, not because you've changed, not because you've chosen solitude, but because consciousness itself creates distance, and that distance, once you feel it, cannot be undone. Most people live their lives on the surface of things, and there's nothing wrong with that. They move through routines, through conversations, through years, without ever asking the questions that would unravel everything. They accept what they're told. They believe what they see. They trust the story everyone agrees on. And in that agreement, they find comfort. They find belonging. They find a kind of peace that feels real enough to call it truth. But then there are those who cannot stop asking. Those who cannot accept the surface as final. Those who look at a sunset and don't just see beauty, but also impermanence. Who sit in silence and hear not peace, but the hum of existence itself, vast and indifferent and impossibly alive. These are the people who begin to awaken, not because they wanted to, not because they were chosen, but because something inside them refused to stay asleep. And here is where the paradox begins, because awakening sounds like a blessing. It sounds like freedom. It sounds like the thing everyone should want. But the moment you begin to see through the illusion, the moment you start living from a place of deeper awareness, you realize something no one tells you. You realize that most of the world doesn't want to wake up. And more than that, they can't understand why you would. So the friendships begin to fade. Not all at once, not dramatically, but slowly, like light leaving a room you didn't realize was dimming. Conversations that once felt meaningful start to feel hollow. People you loved still sit across from you, but the distance between you grows wider. You try to explain what you're feeling, what you're seeing, what you're questioning, and you watch their eyes glaze over. Not because they don't care, but because they can't follow you there. Because the place you're standing now, the place where you've started to truly see, is a place they don't recognize. And what's worse, it's a place they don't want to go. Heidegger understood this. He spoke of being thrown into the world, into a kind of existence that most people never question. He called it das Man, the they-self, the way we all absorb the thoughts, the values, the beliefs of the crowd, without ever stopping to ask if they're ours. And for most people this is enough, it's safe, it's familiar, it's the way life is supposed to be lived. But for those who begin to awaken, who begin to step outside of that collective trance, the safety disappears. The familiarity turns strange, and the life that once felt so solid starts to feel like smoke. And this is why spiritually awake people don't have many friends, not because they're better, not because they're above anyone, but because they've left the common ground. They've stepped into a way of seeing that most people would find unbearable, and once you see it, you can't pretend you don't. You can't go back to the small talk, the surface pleasures, the comfortable lies that make daily life tolerable for everyone else. You can't laugh at the same jokes, you can't care about the same things. And even when you try, even when you force yourself to blend in, there's a part of you that feels like it's suffocating. I once knew someone who described it like this. She said it felt like being the only sober person at a party. Everyone else was dancing, laughing, losing themselves in the moment. And she was there, watching it all, feeling the heaviness of her own clarity. She wasn't judging them. She didn't think she was better, but she also couldn't pretend to be drunk. She couldn't force herself to forget what she knew. And so she stood there alone in a room full of people, wondering if this was what the rest of her life would feel like. And maybe that's the cruelest part of awakening. The loneliness isn't because no one is around. It's because even when people are around, you feel unseen. You feel like you're speaking a language no one else understands. You try to talk about meaning, about purpose, about the strange terror and beauty of being alive, and people stare at you like you've just spoken in tongues. They smile politely. They change the subject. They tell you you're overthinking, and maybe you are, but you also can't stop. Because once the questions start, they don't go away. So you start to retreat, not out of pride, not out of arrogance, but out of exhaustion, because it's tiring to always be the one who feels too much, who sees too much, who asks too much. It's tiring to always be the strange one, the intense one, the one who makes people uncomfortable without even trying. And so you pull back. You stop trying to explain yourself. You stop reaching out. You spend more time alone, not because you don't want connection, but because connection has become almost impossible to find. And here's the thing people don't understand. Solitude for the spiritually awake is not the same as loneliness. Loneliness is the ache of wanting something you don't have. Solitude is the peace of accepting what is. And for those who have awakened, solitude often becomes the only place where they can breathe. Because in solitude there's no pretending, no performing, no exhausting effort to translate your inner world into something digestible for people who don't want to digest it. In solitude, you can just be. And for someone who has spent years feeling like they don't fit anywhere, that simple act of being, without explanation, without defense, can feel like grace. But it's also a loss, because humans are not meant to be alone. We're wired for connection, for community, for the presence of others who see us and know us and hold us when things fall apart. And when you awaken, when you start living from a deeper place, you don't lose the need for connection. You lose the ability to find it easily. You lose the casual friendships, the surface bonds, the relationships built on shared distractions. And what you're left with is a small handful of people, if you're lucky, who can meet you where you are, who don't flinch when you speak from the depths, who don't need you to soften yourself to make them comfortable. These people are rare, and finding them takes time, because the spiritually awake don't connect through hobbies or interests or shared routines. They connect through presence, through truth, through the willingness to sit in the uncomfortable silence and not run from it. And most people, no matter how kind, no matter how good, cannot do that, because it requires something they don't have. It requires the ability to look at life without the comforting stories, to feel the weight of existence without numbing it, to stand in the vastness and not reach for something to fill it. And this is where the danger lies, because when you realize how rare this kind of connection is, it's easy to become bitter. It's easy to start thinking that everyone else is shallow, that everyone else is asleep, that you're somehow cursed with a clarity no one else can handle. But that's not the truth. The truth is more complicated and more humbling. The truth is that everyone is doing the best they can with the consciousness they have. And just because someone isn't awake in the way you are, doesn't mean they're less than you. It just means they're in a different place. And maybe, in some ways, they're spared a burden you have to carry. Think about it this way. Imagine standing at the edge of an ocean at night. Most people stand with their backs to the water, facing the lights of the city, the warmth of the buildings, the familiar glow of what they know. And they're content there. They're safe there. They don't feel the pull of the dark waves behind them. They don't wonder what lies beyond the horizon. They don't feel the strange, uncomfortable call of the unknown. But you do. You've turned around, you're facing the ocean, and once you've seen that vastness, once you've felt that pull, you can't just turn back around and pretend the city lights are enough. You can't unsee the ocean, you can't unfeel its depth. And the people still facing the city, they look at you with confusion. They ask why you're standing there staring at darkness. They tell you to come back, to face the warmth, to stop wasting your time looking at nothing. And you try to explain what you see. You try to tell them about the way the moonlight catches the surface of the water, about the sound of the waves, about the feeling of infinity that washes over you when you stand there long enough. But they don't see it. They don't feel it. And eventually, you stop trying to explain. You just stand there alone facing the ocean while everyone else enjoys the party behind you. This is what spiritual awakening feels like. It's not that you've rejected the world. It's that you've turned to face something the world refuses to acknowledge. And that act of turning, that simple shift in orientation, changes everything. Because now you're living in two worlds at once. You still have to navigate the city. You still have to work, eat, pay bills, show up to obligations. But part of you is always at the edge of that ocean. Always listening to those waves, always feeling that pull towards something deeper, something truer, something that most people will never understand. And the more time you spend at that edge, the harder it becomes to care about the things that used to matter. The conversations feel trivial. The concerns feel small. The drama, the gossip, the endless pursuit of comfort and security and status, it all starts to feel like noise, like static, like a distraction from the only thing that really matters, which is the raw, unfiltered experience of being alive, of being conscious, of standing at the edge of existence and not looking away. But here's what no one tells you about this kind of awareness. It doesn't just change how you see the world, it changes how the world sees you. People start to sense that you're different, even if they can't name it. They feel a kind of intensity in you that makes them uncomfortable, not because you're doing anything wrong, but because your very presence reminds them of the ocean they're trying to ignore. Your silence speaks louder than words. Your stillness disrupts their motion. And without even meaning to, you become a mirror that reflects back something they don't want to see. So they pull away. Not out of malice, not out of cruelty, but out of self-preservation, because being around someone who is truly awake is destabilizing. It raises questions they don't want to ask. It creates discomfort they don't know how to process. And rather than face that discomfort, rather than let themselves be pulled toward the ocean, they simply avoid you. They stop calling. They stop inviting. They create distance without ever explaining why. And you're left wondering what you did wrong, when the truth is you didn't do anything wrong. You just woke up. And that, in itself, was enough to make you incompatible with most of the people you once knew. Because awakening isn't always a gift. Sometimes it feels like a wound that never heals. It's the awareness that life is fleeting, that nothing lasts, that the people you love will die, that the world is full of suffering you cannot fix, that your own existence is fragile and temporary and ultimately unknowable. It's the weight of seeing all of this clearly, without the comfort of denial, without the luxury of distraction. And yes, it brings a kind of freedom, a kind of depth, a kind of beauty that most people never experience. But it also brings a kind of pain that most people never have to feel. There's a particular kind of suffering that comes with heightened awareness. It's not the suffering of tragedy or loss, though those things hurt deeply. It's the suffering of perception itself, of seeing too much, of feeling too much, of understanding too much. It's the suffering of watching people you love sleepwalk through their lives, making choices that will hurt them, believing in things that will fail them, and knowing you can't save them. Because they're not asking to be saved. They're not even aware they're asleep. I remember a conversation I had years ago with someone who had just started waking up. She described it as feeling like she was watching her own life through glass. Everything looked the same. Everything functioned the same. But she couldn't touch it anymore. Couldn't feel it the way she used to. She would sit at dinner with her family, listening to them talk about their plans, their problems, their ordinary concerns, and she would feel this strange vertigo, because she could see how small it all was. Not in a judgmental way, but in the way you might look at a sandcastle on a beach and know that the tide is coming. She could see the impermanence of everything, the fragility, the beautiful, terrible brevity of it all, and no one else at that table could see it. No one else felt what she felt, and she couldn't explain it without sounding like she'd lost her mind. So she stayed quiet. She smiled, she nodded, she played her part. But inside she was screaming. Inside she was drowning in an ocean of awareness that no one else could even see. And that's the particular loneliness of awakening. It's not just that people don't understand you, it's that they can't. Because the things you're seeing, the things you're feeling, exist in a dimension of experience they haven't accessed yet. And maybe they never will. Heidegger wrote about what he called being toward death. The idea that authentic existence requires us to face our own mortality directly, without flinching, without hiding behind distractions or comfortable illusions. Most people, he said, live in a state of forgetfulness about death. They know they're going to die, of course, but they don't really know it. They don't feel it in their bones. They don't let it change how they live. And this forgetfulness, this turning away from death, is what keeps them locked in the everyday, the ordinary, the safe routines of existence. But when you wake up, you can't forget anymore. You become acutely aware that every moment is vanishing as you live it, that every conversation might be the last one, that every sunrise is both a gift and a countdown. And this awareness doesn't make you morbid or depressed, not necessarily. But it does make you different. It makes you value things differently. It makes you unable to waste time on things that don't matter. And it makes you incompatible with people who are still living as if they have forever. Because those people, the ones still asleep, they can afford to be petty. They can afford to hold grudges. They can afford to spend years in jobs they hate, in relationships that drain them, in patterns that go nowhere. Because to them, time feels infinite. Tomorrow always seems to be waiting. There's always next year, always another chance, always more time. But you know better. You've felt the edges of your own existence. You've touched the boundaries of this brief, mysterious experience of being alive. And once you've felt that, you can't go back to living small. You can't pretend that any of this is guaranteed. And so the question becomes, how do you live with this? How do you hold this awareness without letting it crush you? How do you walk through a world that feels increasingly foreign, increasingly hollow, without losing yourself completely? The answer, if there is one, is not to try to make the world understand you. Because it won't. The answer is not to wait for people to wake up and meet you where you are, because most of them never will. The answer is to stop expecting the world to be different than it is. To stop resenting people for living in a way that no longer resonates with you. To stop trying to force connection where connection isn't possible. Instead, the answer is to learn how to hold your awareness lightly. To see deeply without drowning in what you see. To feel fully without being consumed by what you feel. To walk through the world awake, but not at war. Because the real tragedy isn't that spiritually awake people don't have many friends. The real tragedy is when they let that lack of connection harden them. When they let it turn them bitter, cynical, closed. When they start believing that because they see more, they are somehow alone by nature, doomed to a life of isolation. But that's not true. You're not doomed. You're just different. And different doesn't mean broken. It doesn't mean cursed. It means you're living at a frequency that most people don't tune into. And yes, that makes connection harder. It makes friendship rarer. It makes belonging almost impossible to find in the places where everyone else seems to find it so easily. But it also means that when you do find it, when you do meet another person who sees the way you see, who feels the way you feel, who doesn't need you to explain or justify or soften yourself, that connection is profound. It's not based on shared interests or convenient proximity. It's based on something deeper, something truer. And even if it only happens a few times in your life, even if you spend years searching for it, when it arrives, it's worth every lonely moment that came before. Because the spiritually awake don't need a crowd. They don't need constant validation or endless companionship. What they need is one or two people who can hold the weight of their awareness without flinching, who can sit in the silence and not feel the need to fill it, who can look at the world with clear eyes and not turn away. And maybe that's the real lesson here. Maybe the loneliness of awakening isn't a punishment. Maybe it's a purification, a way of stripping away all the false connections, all the shallow bonds, all the relationships built on convenience rather than truth. Maybe it's a way of teaching you that you don't need to be understood by everyone. You don't need to be seen by the masses. You just need to be seen by the right people, and those people, when they come, will recognize you instantly, not because you explained yourself, but because they've been walking the same lonely road, asking the same unanswerable questions, carrying the same quiet weight. Heidegger spoke of authenticity, of living a life that is truly your own, rather than one borrowed from the crowd. And maybe that's what spiritual awakening really is. It's the slow, painful process of shedding every borrowed thought, every inherited belief, every comfortable lie you've been telling yourself about who you are and what life is supposed to be. It's the process of stripping down to the bone, to the raw truth of your own existence, and learning to live from that place no matter how lonely it gets. And yes, it will get lonely, there's no way around that, because most people are not interested in the raw truth. They're interested in comfort, in security, in the illusion that everything is fine, that life makes sense, that if they just follow the right steps, everything will work out. And you can't live that way anymore. You can't pretend. You can't hide. You can't go back to the safety of not knowing. But here's what you can do. You can stop waiting for the world to catch up to you. You can stop expecting people to understand. You can stop resenting them for living differently than you do. Because their path is not wrong. It's just not yours. And your path, as lonely as it may feel, is not a mistake. It's not a curse. It's simply the path of someone who chose to wake up. And once you wake up, the only direction is forward. So you learn to walk alone without bitterness. You learn to find peace in the silence without needing it to be filled. You learn to see the beauty in a world that doesn't see you back. And slowly, over time, the loneliness stops feeling like a wound and starts feeling like a kind of strength, because you're no longer dependent on others to make you feel real. You're no longer waiting for permission to be who you are. You're no longer afraid of the vastness that used to terrify you. This transformation doesn't happen overnight. It's not a single moment of clarity. It's a slow, difficult process of learning to be enough for yourself, of learning that your worth doesn't depend on how many people understand you, that your truth doesn't need to be validated by consensus, that your depth doesn't diminish just because others can't see it. There's a particular moment in the journey of awakening that many people experience, though few talk about it. It's the moment when you stop trying to bring people with you, when you stop hoping that if you just explain it better, speak more clearly, share more openly, that eventually someone will get it. Eventually someone will see what you see. Eventually you won't have to feel so alone in your awareness. And then one day you realize that you've been carrying an impossible hope, the hope that you could wake someone else up, the hope that you could make them see. But consciousness doesn't work that way. You can't give someone your eyes, you can't transfer your awareness like a file from one computer to another. Each person has to walk their own path. Each person has to face their own darkness. Each person has to ask their own questions. And once you accept this, once you truly let go of the need to be understood, something shifts. The loneliness doesn't disappear, but it becomes bearable. It becomes meaningful. Because now you understand that your solitude isn't a failure. It's not a sign that something is wrong with you. It's simply the natural consequence of living at a depth most people aren't ready for. And that's okay. It has to be okay. Because the alternative is to make yourself smaller, to dim your awareness, to go back to sleep just so you can fit in again. And you already know that's impossible. You can't unsee what you've seen. You can't unfeel what you've felt. You can't unknow what you've learned about the nature of existence, about the illusion of permanence, about the profound mystery of consciousness itself. And so you make a choice. Not a dramatic choice, not a once-and-for-all decision, but a daily, moment-by-moment choice to honor your awareness, even when it isolates you. To stay true to what you know, even when everyone around you is living by different rules. To keep facing the ocean, even when everyone else is turned toward the city lights. And here's what happens when you make that choice consistently. When you stop abandoning yourself to be accepted by others. You develop a kind of inner authority, a groundedness that doesn't need external validation. You stop looking for yourself in other people's reactions. You stop measuring your worth by how many friends you have or how well you fit in. You start to understand that the most important relationship you have is the one with yourself, with your own awareness, with your own capacity to see, to feel, to be present with what is. This doesn't mean you become cold or detached. It doesn't mean you stop caring about connection. It means you stop being desperate for it. You stop compromising your truth to obtain it. You stop betraying your own depth to make others comfortable. And paradoxically, this is when real connection becomes possible. Because you're no longer approaching relationships from a place of need, but from a place of fullness. You're no longer asking someone to complete you, but inviting them to meet you in the completeness you've found within yourself. The spiritually awake person who has walked through the loneliness and emerged on the other side carries a different energy. They're not trying to convince anyone of anything. They're not performing depth or advertising their awareness. They simply are who they are, unapologetically, without explanation. And this authenticity, this quiet certainty, attracts a different quality of person. Not the masses, not the crowd, but individuals who recognize that same frequency in themselves, who have walked their own lonely roads, who have asked their own unanswerable questions, who have learned to stand at the edge of the ocean without needing company to make it meaningful. And in that quiet strength, something shifts. You stop chasing connection and start embodying it. You stop looking for people who understand you and start being someone who understands. You stop needing to be seen and start learning to see. And in that shift, the people who are meant to find you do. Not because you went looking, but because you stopped hiding. Because that's the paradox of spiritual awakening. The more you try to fit in, the lonelier you become. But the more you accept your solitude, the more you honor your own depth, the more you live from a place of truth, the more the right people appear. Not in crowds, not in masses, but one by one, like quiet lights in the dark, recognizing each other across the noise. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that's all it was ever supposed to be. Not a life surrounded by hundreds of friends who don't really know you, but a life graced by a few who do. A life lived in depth rather than width. A life where every connection means something, because it's built on truth rather than convenience. In the end, the spiritually awake don't have many friends because they don't need many friends. What they need is depth. What they need is truth. What they need is the kind of connection that doesn't require explanation, that doesn't demand performance, that doesn't ask them to be smaller than they are. And that kind of connection, rare as it is worth more than 1,000 shallow relationships. So if you've been feeling the loneliness of awakening, if you've been wondering why the people around you feel so far away, if you've been questioning whether there's something wrong with you for seeing what others don't see, know this. You're not broken. You're not cursed. You're not too much or too intense or too strange. You're just awake. And the world, for the most part, is still asleep. But that doesn't mean you have to suffer in silence. It doesn't mean you have to carry this alone forever. It just means you have to be patient. It means you have to trust that the people who are meant to walk with you will find you when the time is right. It means you have to stop trying to make yourself smaller to fit into spaces that were never meant for you. And in the meantime, you learn to be your own companion. You learn to sit with your own depth without needing it to be reflected back to you constantly. You learn that solitude is not the absence of connection, but a different kind of connection. A connection to yourself, to the world, to something larger than any individual relationship could ever contain. And maybe, just maybe, that's the real gift of spiritual awakening. Not the friends you lose, but the self you find. Not the crowd that falls away, but the stillness that remains. Not the noise that fades, but the silence that finally, after all this time, starts to feel like home.